In 2025, the world is moving faster than ever. Distractions are everywhere, social media, endless opinions, and then the pushback came. People noticed the change. Some were confused, some were angry, and some even accused him of being selfish. "You've changed," they said, as if it were a bad thing. And for a moment, doubt crept in. Was he making a mistake? Was he really becoming selfish? But then something else happened. Amidst the resistance, a new feeling emerged: clarity. For the first time, he could see who truly valued him and who only kept him around for their own benefit. And as painful as it was, he accepted that some people would never understand his journey. But what happens when you start choosing yourself in a world that wants you distracted? When you break free from expectations, but the people around you try to pull you back? Daniel was about to find out. And the hardest part was yet to come: April telling you what you should do, who you should be, and how you should live. But what if he realized he had been living a life built on fear? Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing others. Every time he wanted to try something new, he had held himself back. Every time he had an idea, he let someone else's opinion kill it before it even started. He had spent years convincing himself that he wasn't good enough, smart enough, or strong enough to chase what he truly wanted. But now there was no one else to blame. So he took his first real step. He set boundaries. He stopped picking up calls from people who drained him. He distanced himself from friends who only reached out when they needed something. He said no to invitations that didn't align with his goals. At first it felt wrong, almost unnatural. He had always been the nice guy, the one who was always available. But the more he focused on himself, the more he realized how much energy he had wasted trying to keep everyone happy except himself. Or once you stopped listening to the noise, what if you decided to focus only on yourself? Imagine this. You wake up one morning and realize that every second you've spent worrying about others, comparing your life, chasing approval, doubting yourself, has stolen time from your own growth. You've been living for them, not for you. And in that moment, something shifts. You choose to block out the distractions, cut the unnecessary, and take full control of your life. This is the story of someone who made that choice. Meet Daniel. A regular guy just like you, who spent years putting others first, his friends, his family, his co-workers, always making sure everyone was happy except himself. He scrolled through social media, watching others succeed while he stayed stuck. He kept quiet when he should have spoken up. He said yes when he wanted to say no. And every day he felt like life was slipping through his fingers. But then something happened. A moment that changed everything. It wasn't some big dramatic event, no accident, no heartbreak, no sudden loss. It was a simple realization: no one was coming to save him. No one was going to push him towards success. No one was going to live his life for him. If he wanted change, he had to create it. If he wanted success, he had to build it. And if he wanted happiness, he had to find it within himself. So Daniel made a choice. He stopped wasting energy on people who didn't matter. He stopped seeking validation. He stopped letting fear control him. And from that moment on, his life was never the same. But what did he do next? And how did focusing only on himself transform everything? Stay with me, because this is where the real story begins. At first, Daniel didn't know where to start. He had spent so much of his life prioritizing other people's opinions that focusing on himself felt unfamiliar, almost selfish. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He wasn't abandoning anyone, he was just choosing himself for the first time. So he began small. The first thing he did was silence the noise. He deleted apps that drained his energy. He stopped replying to messages that only brought negativity. He pulled away from conversations that revolved around gossip and complaints. And in the silence, something strange happened. He felt uneasy, almost lost. For the first time in years, there was no external voice telling him what to do. It was just him, his thoughts, and an uncomfortable realization. He had no idea who he really was without the influence of others. That thought scared him. But instead of running from it, he decided to face it. He started waking up earlier, giving himself time to think. He wrote down his goals, his fears, and every dream he had buried under self-doubt. He asked himself questions no one had ever asked him. What do I truly want? What makes me happy? What have I been avoiding? And the answers shocked him. As Daniel continued to focus on himself, he felt a strange mix of freedom and isolation. On one hand, his mind was clearer than ever. He had space to think, to plan, to finally take control of his own life. But on the other hand, the world around him seemed to be resisting. He saw how much of his energy had been wasted on people who never truly supported him. How often he had bent over backward for those who never did the same in return. How many times he had dimmed his own light just to make others comfortable. And now that he wasn't playing that role anymore, those people had disappeared. Maybe they never cared about him. Maybe they only cared about what he could do for them. But just as he started to embrace his new reality, the real test arrived. One night, an old friend reached out. A friend he had once considered a brother. Someone who had been there during his toughest times. Someone he thought would always have his back. The message was simple. ***, we need to talk. ***, his change. Friends who once relied on his constant availability grew distant. Conversations that used to feel comfortable now felt forced. The people who used to laugh with him now barely checked in. And that's when he realized something. When you start prioritizing yourself, you begin to see who was truly there for you and who was only there for what you could give them. At work, the shift was even more noticeable. He had always been the one to step in when others slacked off, taking on extra tasks just to avoid conflict. But now he stopped. He did his job well, better than ever, but he no longer sacrificed his own time just to pick up someone else's mess. And the moment he did, people started whispering. He's acting different. What's up with him? He used to be a team player. It was strange. The same people who had once taken advantage of his kindness now resented him for setting boundaries. But Daniel knew he couldn't turn back now. He had spent too long living for everyone else. If that meant losing people, so be it. Then came the biggest test, his family. They had always known him as the dependable one, the one who never said no, who always dropped everything to help. So when he started putting himself first, they didn't understand. His mother, who had always leaned on him for emotional support, accused him of being distant. His brother, who had relied on him for financial help, called him selfish. Even his closest cousin, who used to admire his patience, told him he was changing too much. For the first time, Daniel questioned himself. Had he really gone too far? Was focusing on himself hurting the people he loved? The guilt weighed on him. It would have been so easy to slip back into his old habits, to go back to being the person everyone expected him to be. But deep inside, he knew, if he did, he would be right back where he started. And then, an unexpected moment changed everything. One night, after another exhausting conversation filled with guilt and accusations, he sat alone, scrolling through old photos on his phone. He saw a picture of himself from 2 years ago, smiling, surrounded by people, looking happy. But when he looked closer, he saw the truth. His eyes were tired. His posture was tense. He remembered that day clearly. He had been mentally drained, overwhelmed, pretending to be fine just to keep up appearances. That was the moment it hit him. He had spent years performing, playing a role in everyone else's lives while neglecting his own. And now, as he finally started living for himself, Daniel hesitated. He knew this wasn't just a casual check-in. It felt different. There was tension in those words, and part of him already knew what was coming. But he agreed to meet anyway. When they sat across from each other, he could see it right away. The discomfort, the unspoken words. His friend didn't waste time. "People are saying you've changed," he said, his tone careful, like he was testing the waters. "You don't come around anymore. You don't reach out. It's like you don't care." Daniel felt a familiar guilt rise in his chest. This was someone he had known for years. Someone who had once meant everything to him. But instead of reacting emotionally, he took a deep breath. "I do care," he said, his voice steady. "But I spent so much time taking care of everyone else that I forgot to take care of myself." His friend leaned back, shaking his head. "That's not how this works. We all make sacrifices. You can't just decide to focus on yourself and expect people to be okay with it." And there it was, the truth Daniel had been avoiding. It wasn't just that people didn't understand his journey. It was that they felt threatened by it. His change forced them to look at their own lives, their own choices, their own fears. And instead of facing that, they wanted him to go back to who he used to be. For a moment, he considered it. It would be easier. Less conflict, less tension, less loneliness. But then he remembered the exhaustion, the frustration, the feeling of being stuck. He had come too far to turn back now. Still, the conversation wasn't over. His friend wasn't just here to talk, he was here to make Daniel choose between his old life and the one he was fighting for. And as the moment stretched between them, Daniel realized something. This wasn't just about one conversation. This was the breaking point, the moment everything could change, for better or worse. Daniel sat there, his friend's words hanging heavy between them. It felt like an ultimatum, a choice between the comfort of familiarity and the uncertainty of his new path. But before he could respond, his friend leaned in, lowering his voice. "You think this is growth? Pushing people away? Acting like you don't need anyone?" His tone wasn't just frustrated, it was almost desperate. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I never said I don't need anyone," he said. "But I do need to stop needing the wrong people." His friend scoffed. "The wrong people? So now everyone who actually gave a damn about you is wrong." That's when it hit him. This wasn't just about his own growth. This was about control. His friend wasn't upset because Daniel had changed. He was upset because Daniel's change made him question his own life. People like things to stay the same, predictable, comfortable. And when one person breaks away, it forces everyone else to look in the mirror. But before Daniel could say another word, his phone buzzed. A message from his boss. ***, we need to talk first thing tomorrow. ***. His stomach tightened. This was unexpected. He had been performing better than ever at work, focused, efficient, no longer stretching himself thin for tasks that weren't his responsibility. But something about the tone of the message felt off. His friend noticed his expression change. "What is it?" Daniel hesitated before pocketing his phone. "Nothing," he muttered. His friend studied him for a long moment. Then, with a bitter smile, he shook his head. "You think you're winning, don't you?" he said. "You think shutting everyone out is some kind of power move." Daniel sighed. As soon as he stepped inside, he noticed the shift. Conversations quieted as he passed. People who once greeted him with smiles barely made eye contact. He could sense the tension in the air, the kind that comes before something breaks. He took a deep breath and walked straight to his boss's office. His boss was already waiting, hands folded, expression unreadable. "Have a seat," he said, his voice unusually firm. Daniel sat, his heartbeat steady but his mind racing. His boss exhaled and leaned forward. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said. "You've changed. And not everyone is happy about it." Daniel felt a flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even amusement. Of course, people weren't happy. People didn't like when others stopped being easy to control. "I've changed for the better," Daniel said carefully. "I'm more productive, more focused. I'm doing my job better than ever." His boss nodded slowly. "That's true. But the thing is, people liked you more before." There it was. The real issue. The problem wasn't his work. It was his refusal to keep playing the role he used to.